Catherine. So notification of any items of business, it's deemed urgent. I've had nothing in advance. But to confirm that I think if I've got the paper on call centre opening times, which apologies for that coming later than normal. So disclosure of interest. Anyone got any interest or dispensation at this point? As we are discussing TMOs tonight, I've been asked just to ask if any members of the subcommittee are members of TMOs. And I'll ask you again later on.
Well, I'm elected by residents on the Burning TMO.
Thank you, Martin. And so just ask legal advice on, does that affect whether the company...
Unless it's partially running towards your direct interest, it's fine.
Right, and same question to just welcome
Sorry for my lateness.
we're just, because we're looking at TMOs, we're just checking whether people are members of TMOs before we get there. Great. Okay, so let's, I should say as well, yeah.
So I just keep making a point. Miriam Facey has not been on Tenant Council for over a year now.
So should Tenant Council then nominate a new reserve?
I have actually contacted the appropriate officer and awaiting an update from him.
But perhaps at the next meeting of Tenant Council, if you remind me, I'll remind you, maybe we'll ask them to nominate someone to be the reserve as when you start making it. Yeah. The reason we don't have any minutes tonight, it's the previous committee that needs to agree the minutes from the last meeting. As we're a new committee, those minutes will be circulated to the old committee for agreement before coming back to us at the next meeting. But it's from last year's different committee, so that's the reason we're doing this. So let's go to the main item of business then. So consultation with tenants, call centre opening time. I know Steve's joining us slightly late. I'm going to ask Richard to talk us through the paper, and Ian will be able to listen in and to respond afterwards, and once Steve gets here, Steve can join us. So yeah, if you'd like to come up here, Richard, thank you. And just a brief overview, a couple of minutes. We'll assume that members here have read the bulk of this, but if you pick out a few key points.
Sure, yeah. Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, everybody, and thanks very much for inviting me along to your meeting this evening to talk about the consultation on the changes to the contact centre opening hours. And its consultation essentially took two forms. One part was resident consultation, and one part was as part of the consultation on the budget process, which went on throughout last year and beginning of this year. Southwark, I think, was unique pretty much. I'm not aware of another local authority contact centre that had a fully responsive 24-hour telephone service. Most local authorities deliver an emergency service only, and that's one of the recommendations we put forward as part of our budget savings round last year, one of the recommendations for our services. Quite understandably, the Council is very keen to make sure that any budget process does its best to preserve frontline services, protect the vulnerable, and have the minimum impact on residents. And we felt that this fit this criteria, and we therefore recommended it. And it was eventually agreed by Cabinet earlier this year. So what we did have, we had a fully responsive contact centre that worked 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So the change was to make that a 9 to 5 service, Monday to Friday, from the 1st of April. But at all other times, there was still an emergency service. So people who had an emergency, whether that was in their home or whether it was out and about, wherever that might be, would still get an emergency service. So the drivers for that change were threefold. Paragraph 6 there, a reduction in out-of-hours calls we were aiming to achieve, an improvement in service performance for residents calling out-of-hours service. And I'm delighted to say that despite it only going live on 1st of April, we've already achieved that. Performance is very, very good. We're hitting targets. and of course a reduction in the overall cost of delivering out of our services. So that's what we introduced on the 1st of April. And I think the truth is, I know this can be quite a difficult subject with some people, and I know Tenants Council, certainly made their feelings known when I attended their last 2 meetings about this. But in truth, I think most people, it is one of those savings which I don't think most people realised have happened, because I suspect most people probably felt that we only had a Sunday daytime service anyway. And out of that, as I say, we provide, I think, a very good emergency out of our service. And one of the telling things is that actually I've had very little feedback from residents about the changes in ours. And I suspect if I did a straw poll in the room, most people wouldn't have even known it's gone live on the 1st of April. That's the impact that it had. So it made significant savings to the general fund, and we believe it sort of fit the criteria of having a minimum impact on customers. There was a considerable amount of consultation through the budget process, and it was very clearly laid out in the budget process that this is one of the proposals. And you'll know that Stephen Douglas sort of managed these community conversations, and one of those community conversations was about the budget, and people were asked where they'd like to preserve services, where they'd be happy to see cuts in services, and actually, disappointingly from my point of view, they were happy to see cuts in customer services. But that's understandable when you're comparing that with children's services, libraries, services for older people, and I think that's, I agree, that's just as important. And resident consultation was also considerable, and you'll see at the top of page 3 the various area housing forums and other meetings that we attended. But one of the key messages about this change, Chair, is that the Council's delivering far more services online. Not many people these days are very used to doing things online. They're used to doing banking online. They're used to doing their shopping online. They're used to looking things up online. I think that's fairly commonplace for very many of our residents. So we've worked hard in the last couple of years to improve our online service delivery, culminating in our housing portal and through the My Southwark account that went live last October, which enables people to raise repairs through their My Southwark account. They can look up their rent account online, they can look up their service charge online for those leaseholders who want to do so. You can track a repair and so on. Our My Southwark account, we topped the 100,000 number of customers a couple of months ago. So in terms of popularity, we're very pleased with that, the take-up of the My Southwark account. So it demonstrates that there's an appetite for online service delivery. So in terms of a package, we think that improvements in online service delivery, that appetite, as I say, from residents doing it, we made the change, it delivered the savings that we were hoping to achieve, which weren't insignificant to the general fund. And we all know the pressures that are on the general fund and those difficult decisions that members need to make. And we think it was on balance, it was a good saving, if you can put it in that way.
So you'll recall that at Tenant Council, the specifics that came up at that meeting were around the consultation. You've gone into some detail in the report about the efforts there to consult at area forums and Tenant Council. But I'd like to get a perspective on that from Ian and from Steve now. What I'd like to hear is, having seen the consultation in this document and the list of things that the council did, I'd like to get your perspective on how involved you felt at the time as Tenant Council, and whether or not you feel the consultation went far enough. Don't go too much now into what the council could do. I'm going to come back to that at the end of the session, ask you suggestions. But just give us a couple of minutes flavour of how this consultation was for Tenant Rep.
Richard attended the last Tenants Council when we were highly critical of the way the consultation had been handled. I've got to say that there's a misunderstanding here, and I think Chris checked on some of the background minutes today on the list of people. We did not understand that this was talking, these consultations we understood them as listed on 13. We understood to be the consultation on my Southwark, right, how to access it. Right? And I cannot recall, past my memory, and I think Chris has got the minutes of the SGPO meeting where that happened. I cannot recall mentioning the fact that there would be cuts, but this is not about cuts. Right? We all understand that cuts have to be made. We live in a very tight economic situation. What we do understand, though, is that statute says that secure tenants have to be consulted on major changes. Right? And we are saying that that is not how it's happening. Right? We are saying that things happen very quickly, the changes are made very quickly. And I'll give an example. Right? We went through an exercise on, and this is by way of, we went through an exercise in consulting on this year's lease rents. Right? We made certain recommendations about how the rent should be equalised rather than having a two-tier structure. And that went to Housing Committee or to Cabinet, sorry, not Housing Committee, with my age already. That went to Cabinet the day after. Officers totally ignored the Tenants' Council recommendations and gave only their own. Well, what's the point? What was the point of the exercise to do that? And there's a bit of this involved here, right? It's not, I don't believe that consulting with focus groups, whatever they are, right, and who they are, is consulting with secure tenants as you're required to do in statute. It's not consulting on major changes. Now, focus groups might be the buzzword, right? But if you ask somebody who lives down my road, who doesn't happen to be a council tenant, what do you think of this? I don't care what they think, right? If it affects the services that I get specifically as a tenant, right? That's not the way to find out. So they need to be talking to us, right? And I've got to say, in general terms, right, the way that the Tenants' Council and the consultation strategy, right, and the consultation bodies that were involved in the area forums are particularly badly consulted because the information doesn't actually come to us. Now, I've got a background in consultation. Was some years ago here the principal community development officer. And I should call committee agendas and say to the chief officer, right, this should go to tenants. Right? This should go on the Tenants' Council agenda. That no longer happens. What we get to talk about now, I think, is entirely accidental. Right? And so I won't go further because I'll comment, but it certainly is not about the same. I just said one thing though. We are saying that we've got access to digital inclusion. There's 16 million people in Britain who are not digitally included, and there's a large number of tenants in Southwark from the work that I can't think of his name, the guy in digital inclusion. Kevin Dykes has done on digital inclusion, which has been partly funded through the Tenants Fund to train people to increase that. And the work he thinks that there's about 34,000 people in Southwark who are not digitally included. So if you can't get on a computer at 3 o'clock in the morning because you've got a flood come through your roof and nobody will answer the phone, you've got a problem. But I must say, this is, and I was surprised when it was restricted only to the consultation through on the call centre, because I think we're unhappy with consultation across the piece. Right? So that might be something this committee might think of in their deliberations to send back to the relevant officers of the council. So you go into that.
So you put the third and then we'll come back.
Those that don't know, I'm speaking as I'm chair of Tenant Council. I raised the issue really at Tenant Council as well that previously where there's been large changes in budget allocation, it was something that was discussed at the budget process. At no in addition to what I would consider a failure to properly consult from the call centre consultation point of view as well. As Ian said, my recollection of the consultation listed in the paper there was the consultation about my Southwark. I know at my forum we took the opportunity to broaden it out a little bit, but it wasn't done in any formal sort of way. And generally, historically, what has happened is there's going to be some sort of service change. We have a report that comes to area forums and tenant council and homeowner council that says this is what we're proposing, this is what our recommendations are. We would like your comments on those recommendations, or in favour, against, etc. Maybe knows how it works. It's the same at all committees and throughout the council. And that's what we've always had. But we seem to be moving more towards a thing that's more difficult to quantify. Somebody that's taken an opinion from focus groups or from some other sort of wider consultation, and things are not so black and white. I think we're left in a situation here where tenants particularly feel that it's very black and white, we don't like it, but officers are kind of saying, well, the consultation that we did kind of showed that you did like it, and that's not the case. I think people are very much against it. It represents a significant reduction in the level of service that we're receiving. It makes it much more difficult for us to access council services. And it was a big thing, and it's like it's just been slipped through underneath us, and we're told that we all agreed it. We didn't at all. It was not agreed by anybody.
Okay. I mean, very keen to stay, and thanks both for giving us that explanation. Very keen that we concentrate specifically this evening on how this was consulted. I'm very interested in how the call centre works, and we'll look at that on an ongoing basis. But tonight, we're really interested in, was this consultation, similar to other consultations that's on the forum, and Steve mentioned their process, which may not have been the same this time. But also, how do people feel? Do people feel they were involved? I'm going to go back to Richard first, because he wanted to answer a few of those points, and then I'm going to open up to questions from the committee to Richard and to Ian and Steve about what we've heard so far.
I really want to respond to one point Mr. Ritchie made, and I think it's an important one, which is that there is still a 24-hour service. We mustn't lose sight of that. So if you had an emergency, you can phone 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, just like you always have been. So it would be incorrect to say you can't get through. So for those people who haven't got access to online services, there is still a 24-hour service.
Thanks, Richard. I'm going to take questions. Okay, Ben, Chris, Johnson, Damien.
Thank you all for coming. I think the Chair's absolutely right. There's kind of two separate issues here. There's the quality of the consultation, then there's the quality of the service at the call centre. And so just focusing on the consultation, I don't know if you can give us a bit more detail from your perspective about how the consultation happened, what kind of questions you were asking, how you process the results of the consultation, and what effect the consultation has, because it may be that you consulted, everyone said they didn't like it, and then you thought, well, we need to save this money. But I think it'd be useful to get a bit more information about how you carried out the consultation, the questions you asked, and how you processed, what effect that consultation has on your decision making.
It was certainly a recommendation we were making around about this time last year for savings in 15-16 as officers to meet our savings commitments for this financial year. So we entered that into the budget consideration process probably around the end of last summer. So we were discussing it with our lead cabinet member and so on around about that time, and it was getting scrutinised by members and peers around about that time. So that was entered into the budget process. But at the same time, we had the community conversations going on. Now, they were very much, I don't want to kind of mislead you and suggest that it had a menu of things that people could say, yes, I like that saving, no, I don't like that one. It was very much about looking at where residents could be achieved, more palatably in one area rather than the other. It's kind of, what's the lesser of two evils? So, but they were asked to comment on where they would be, be less unhappy to see the savings taken. And one of those areas was certainly in the customer services area. So, but it wasn't talking specifically about the consultation. So I'll be upfront about that. So the next stage of consultation, because we got a fairly an early indication that it would be accepted, it would be as part of the budget process, and it would go forward as a recommendation. So we were getting that feedback from members that it's likely to be accepted, which it eventually was as part of the budget recommendation earlier this year. So we knew at that point that that was likely to be one of the recommendations, which is why we started doing that consultation. We did make a great play about the alternatives, because I can understand that some people, that is a deterioration in service. We wanted to make sure they understood that you could still access services online 24 hours a day. You still had the emergency services. So that was the very clear message we were trying to get across on that consultation. But I think one of the legitimate concerns that Tenants Council, you might think, certainly had, is that we didn't, ask them before that decision making was there would be the green light on that decision making was made.
I just think that's a very quick follow-on. So in terms of, so you had, and I remember those consultations, I think it was customer experience. The customer experience got kind of more red dots than, say, hospitals or whatever.
Yeah, that's
it was community council. So was there any specific consultation around how would you react to a reduction in hours of the call centre?
There was, we weren't asking specifically that question, though.
I've got a question and some comments. I mean, in the community conversation, you speak to a vast number of people who aren't necessarily council tenants. So if you've got somebody who is an owner-occupier, and you ask them what services would they prefer, I think it's a funny thing if they prefer to seek out. We don't want any, people don't want any cuts, but if they had to prioritise, they certainly wouldn't prioritise a call centre or any of the services for council tenants. So I don't believe that should be part, but these community conversations are almost overtaking consultation with the tenants movement, and decisions are being made and opinions being given about the rights of council tenants by people where it will never touch their lives. And I look at the list of consultation, and I think consultation is actually the wrong word. We had a presentation at the Peckham Area Housing, Numhead, and Peckham Line Area Housing Forum on the 27th of November, and we were shown how to use my Southwark, and it was very interesting and quite enlightening and quite an interesting evening. Resulting from that, my own particular tenants association, Buckham Road CNRA, had a general meeting on the 2nd of February. So I said it would be good to have the presentation at the general meeting, because it would be interesting for other tenants on the estate to know what's going on. That wasn't consultation about whether the call centre should shorten its hours or not. It was to enlighten people on how they could use my Southwark. And then following from that, we had on the 25th of March, the SGTO, on the basis of, yes, this was a quite interesting thing to do, I suggested that we did it at the SGTO. And the minutes actually show that that presentation was about my Southwark. And in fact, the minutes say that the operating hours for the call centre would be a topic on the agenda for the next group meeting. But that was our choice. That wasn't because someone was going to come and discuss it with us. We decided that this is something we should discuss amongst ourselves. And I have to say, I haven't been to any meeting of tenants where they were properly consulted on whether the hours should be shortened, because we're talking about savings in the general fund, but there's no savings in the HRA for this service. our service has been cut. And just once again, it feels like we haven't been consulted, and that people have been consulted to whom it means nothing to them, and given their views, and those views have actually taken wider preference to the views of the people who are actually going to be affected by what's happening. And it just is an ongoing thing it just feels, and I think you heard it at Tenant Council, it was actually said, well, you won't listen to us because we're not a focus group. And it feels that more attention is being given to community conversations. And I don't know how in-depth those community conversations are, but it seems that there's more, you're taking more notice of community conversations than you are of a structure that you're really proud to have. You know, you see it advertised, what a wonderful structure we've got in Southwark. We've got all this consultation structures, and we've got area forums. Our last area forum had nothing on the agenda, so we had to make our agenda up really, because the council doesn't bring anything down. Whereas, like in the old days, we used to get items that were going to be discussed, but it was housing committee then and in cabinet, so that we could have some sort of view on it. It just doesn't happen anymore.
Just a quick couple of points on that. Maybe some misunderstanding about the call centre, but the call centre is not just a service to tenants. In fact, if you look at statistically, we get about 50% of our calls are about housing repairs, and 50% of calls are about other things, usually environmental services, about waste collection, about street cleaning, graffiti removal, highway issues, and so on. So it's around about 50-50. And the emergency services that we deliver out of ours are used by tenants and non-tenants. So often tenants with an emergency, whether they've got a leak or something, but equally it's also used by others, concerned about, for example, dangerous scaffolding, offensive graffiti or whatever it might be that needs to be attended to urgently. So just make that point. Now, I didn't do all of these consultation meetings. I did some of them, so I can't vouch for exactly what was said at each meeting, but the key messages I said I put in the paper at point 14, which was, I agree, it was about promoting the My Southwark account, delivering our services online, but it was intended to be balanced with that, and as a result of that, we're changing the opening hours of the service in order to achieve our savings in this financial year.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, and thank you, Steve and Chris, everyone, providing us an update on the situation. I attended the Peckham area forum in Peckham, and I got the sense that there was a strong story to tell, or there was a strong piece of information that was being put out in terms of encouraging people to go onto My Southwark and showing how you can interact with our services on My Southwark and how that shift from call centres was going to happen. I wanted to ask a little bit more to what degree, because I feel part of the challenge maybe was whether the people that were actually conducting the consultation or the talk were totally up to date in terms of the narrative that was trying to be put across. So whether it was, whether we were encouraging people to come onto My Southwark or we were explaining about it, and that was all the savings. And so it would be interesting to see what was the training, or not necessarily training, but what was the brief going to people conducting those talks. Was the story or was the information being put across showing a journey that residents can take, or was it very much trying to get an opinion on the current situation as it was at the moment?
I think it was both really. I think it was trying to tell exactly that story, and I'm glad that story came across. So most of the meetings were attended by my service development team, and their function, as it gives away in the title, their job is about improving our services, whether that's online or face-to-face or over the telephone or however it may be. But one of their main agendas is about online service delivery, because we know we've got cuts coming in the future, and one of the ways we think that we can mitigate the impacts of some of those cuts is by delivering online services to those people who can access it. So customers accessing it self-serve. So there is a journey, there is a story, and I'm glad that came across. But it should have been tempered, or should be tempered, with changes in service delivery. I'm unabashed about that. We need to look at how we can deliver our services cheaper in the future. So it is about, as you said, what's happening now, and the narrative was about the changes in service delivery, but very much with that, please use our online services. They're a lot better. If you haven't used them more recently, please try them now.
Before I bring Damien in, Steve, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just want to say about the messages that were being put across. I mean, referring to the paragraph 14, I think it was bullet point 5 on page 3 says, key messages were, a telephone service will still be available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, for those who require an emergency response.
That should be an. Well, that's my typing.
Okay, well, I know we had a discussion about the effects that the promoting of an online service would have at our forum, and the impression that we were given was that it wasn't on the table that service was going to go away. And my view is that was kind of sceptical in that you only have limited resource to provide all these services, and if you're pushing more money into the development of one area of service, it generally means that another area is going to lose it because the cost of money is finite. But we were given no indication that there was going to be a withdrawal of the telephone service. And certainly at the Tenant Council before the decision was made, I spoke to Councillor Livingston, and I confronted him. I think it was confronted him with the rumour that was going around that the service was going to be cut, and he said to me that it's just something that's on the table, no decision's been made yet. And really, if it was on the table, then we should have been more involved, I think, in that discussion process. We've heard that discussions were taking place with members much earlier on. And to me, that would have been the point to involve us, so that members could have had a more informed, or not to make more informed decisions about what residents actually felt about it. So I think it's very clear from that an opportunity was missed.
Thank you. Thanks for coming down. Actually, my question was very much along Johnson's lines and pretty much what you were saying as well. But I'm just wondering, we have this emergency service on the phone that's 24/7. My worry is that the consultation, people didn't realise what they were being consulted on, what the consequences of that were. It was kept a bit fuzzy by the sounds of things. And I was wondering if you could perhaps give us a bit of an idea of what you would consider a bad enough situation for that emergency service to react to. What would happen at 2 o'clock in the morning that would or would not be reacted to on the emergency phone service?
That's the main point I'm making about this is, and why I kind of called it a good saving, if there can be one, is that the reaction from residents has almost been non-existent. And in all honesty, I don't think, I said if you did a straw poll, I bet that most people wouldn't know it had gone live. And I suspect if you went down to Devon Mansions and asked the people in there, did it, what happened on the 1st of April, and of course they probably wouldn't know it either. Because most people access the service in the daytime anyway, and we continue to have an emergency response. So for those people who need it, that emergency response is still there. So what we won't do in the evening, for example, and I know this is an example Steve uses, if you're phoning to say that a light's out, which isn't in an area which needs to be well lit at all times, and you're phoning that at 12 o'clock on a Saturday night, we won't receive that as an emergency.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally straight. I'm asking for where the boundary would be. For example, once in 5 years, a tenant's
heating may go
Yeah.
in winter time or something. This is the time they're going to
No,
find
that is
they
an
need
emergency.
it. Okay.
That is an emergency. So the emergencies, they're not set by us, they're set by our colleagues in repairs and maintenance, and they set what the criteria in terms of what an emergency is, and our task, or the task of our operators, is to interpret it. You know, those to talk to the resident, understand whether or not it falls within the criteria of emergency or not, and raise a repair, and if necessary, we'll send around the plumber. But certainly in winter, heating is an emergency.
Thank you. It does sort of, I think if we're going to have consultation with people, we have to be asking questions about services. And I think that there's some things about how this has been presented overall that doesn't feel like there were so many questions as presenting an alternative. And that just seems a fundamental part, a difference between information giving and consultation. But another thing I wanted to pick up on was around actually what fund the money comes from, because I think that is probably significant here. Steve, you mentioned that rent has gone up, and that's obviously to do with the housing fund, which I know is a separate pot of money. And you mentioned in your introduction that this is about savings in the general fund. I just wondered if you might be able to comment on that.
Yeah, sure. All contact centre services are general fund services. We recharge the HRA, however, for the proportion of those services that are directly related to our housing functions, our functions as a landlord. But it is a general funded service, so whenever the cuts come, unfortunately, all general fund services are, up front and centre in terms of that. I understand what you say about the consultation, and I appreciate what you say, thank you. But there was a decision-making process, and whilst it had a service impact, it also had a budget impact, and that decision-making process was the service impact was a budget decision, and that budget decision was made in February by Cabinet and recommended at full council.
Martin?
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting listening to this one, of course. But of course, if I was asked a question by others, why are these changes being made? I'd make it clear to all in country that we are in an age of austerity, and we are experiencing year-on-year reductions in the council's budget. And therefore, we will continue year-on-year to continue to reconfigure our services. So that's the background, and I think it is necessary to keep restating that, because all too often I hear people talking about, well, we don't want any reductions, but of course central government controls 70% of our budget, and therefore reductions would occur. That's the background. It's a harsh fact. We are but in this instance we're victims of central government policies. So again, I want to say that before I make any other comments. So when I look at this, I understand why it's been counted this way, but there's two questions. One, these consultation meetings, were they all officer-led, or was there maybe a cabinet member or someone on the policy side present as well to talk about the reasons why it's necessary to make these changes? My first question. My second question really focused on comments made by my colleagues from Tenant Council, and I'm very conscious that these individuals I've known for a very long time, and with opinions I've known with due respect. Oh, I have to admit, even I, look at my hair. Come on, let's get real. Come on. So, here it is. This is enough already. Enough already. So, I'm very sensitive where very experienced individuals who've worked in the community for a very long time questions the validity of a consultation exercise. Okay? And therefore, if that's been said, I've got to listen to it. Okay? I'll make that clear. So the point I want to make is this. In preparing for a meeting where you're consulting with tenants, do you prepare that meeting in consultation, for example, with the tenant council, who are clearly representative of tenants, who have a vested interest to make sure that this consultation is a successful one, and the key points that tenants and others might make are actually fed through to officers and appear in a document somewhere, so that the cabinet member and the cabinet, therefore, will receive and understand the range of opinions expressed by tenants at all of these meetings which you attended.
So your first question, the answer to that is they were officer-led. So
purely officer-led.
Yeah. So as I said, it was comes under my team, comes under customer experience. So they were officers of my team who were leading that exercise, presentation, consultation, whatever you want to call it. In terms of the Tenants Council, well, I know there's an agenda setting exercise carried out. I'm guessing either on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. Officers like myself will put forward the things that we want to bring to Tenants Council attention, and we will seek to put those on the agenda. So we will consult as far as that. I must admit it doesn't go any further than that, and I don't recall anybody coming back to me when we asked to put the item on the agenda. I don't recall anybody coming back to me to ask what it was about or anything in addition to that. So I think you're getting at there's some sort of collaborative exercise. That's not from my understanding. Whether or not Steve meets with, for example, Stephen Douglas, who's on that communities and consultation side, I don't know. You might be able to illuminate more on that.
If I may just a quick follow-up, Chair, if I may, very quick one. So again, just to be quite clear, again, I'll point out when we've got it for some time. So in fact, if it were a community council, for example, I would prefer if officers explain to me in detail what it is they're going to present at community council, but I'm very sensitive to the idea that not to be aware of what is being said will lead you over to all sorts of exposure at the meeting, which may either cause the meeting to be disruptive or not. So it's always better to have a complete paper in front of you, so you know what's going to be said, so that members here are able to express an opinion or suggest revisions to it to ensure that it will be effective in terms of its objective to seek opinion from local people. Now, if that's not your standard practice, maybe later on, Chair, it might be a recommendation that we might want to put forward, that particularly a consultation which might result in a significant change in the way in which we interact with the council. I would suggest that might be a change of practice that we might want to look at later on.
I appreciate your advice. What I would say is that the budget savings exercise is difficult, and let's be honest, it's not going to get any easier this year, next year, or the year after that. Residents, I think, just like the rest of us, will find some of those very difficult, and some of those decisions are unpalatable. And when I was at Tenants Council, the decision-making process, the budget setting process, is a council process. It's not a Tenants Council process, and that's not, that's not decrying the Tenants Council and the important work that they do at all. But they are difficult decisions to make, and as I say, some people will find those quite unpalatable and these difficult things to implement. And as I say, if you go back to the substantive change, we've saved a significant amount of money on that budget, made a large contribution to the general fund savings for the year, and actually, there's very, very little impact on most residents.
You say that often. You said that often tonight. We hear the impact on tenants from where we are, because that's the only impact we hear. Tenants don't come to us to say, we reported the repair has done well. They come to us to say it hasn't been. So I think where you're coming from is the interpretation of that. I think the online post, it feels a bit patronising, really, because of course, as tenants, we understand what is happening. We're all we're the end. That's where it hits everybody, isn't it? So I don't think we need to be patronised in that way. I think what we need is honesty. And if it isn't consultation, if at the end of the day what we say actually isn't going to make any difference, because this is how it is, and this is how as it was with the discussions the Tenant Council has about target rent, you know, what a waste of our time to even sit there for an hour and discuss it when it wasn't even going to be considered. You know, and I find that really patronising, condescending. Be honest with us. We want to know what is real consultation, where we can actually have an input and help to make that final decision. And what are you telling us is actually, whether we like it or not, is going to happen. Because that's the only way you're going to build any relationship with us at all. I mean, it was very clear at the last Tenant Council. I can only speak for my own area forum. Something must have come out of Tenant Council because suddenly 2 councillors emerged at our area forum, probably the first time for a year. And we do cover three areas. So there's a potential of 9 councillors. And, you know, we would expect 1 councillor from each of those wards to come along to hear what we've got to say, so that when you're having discussions, you've got some idea of where we're coming from. At Tenants Council, Tom comes, and I have to say Richard comes, but very few other councillors, and we wouldn't want to be inundated with councillors. We would like a few councillors to come along that it has some impact on the decisions that they have to make within the particular circle. The chair of the director of housing, I can't remember the last time she came to Tenants Council. Now, if the director of housing is not listening to what we say, then it's quite obvious it doesn't matter what we say, because we're not going to be taken notice of anyway. So our criticism, because the subject tonight is about consultation, you know, the discussion about the call centre is another discussion in a way. You know, our real concern is about the path now of consultation. And I think it has never, I can say, I've been in the tenants movement for probably over 30 years, this is the worst level of consultation has ever been, in my experience.
Final points from Ian and Steve. What I'm really interested in is, say this started today, say this was let's talk about the next version of this. There's going to be something that the consultants do, and I don't know what that'll be. How would that look in an ideal world to you?
Let's start off with the rest my case here on that. Right? I'm here to say that what's been said here, it's not about the delivery of the service. It's about how you consult them with us. We're realists, right? We're not fools. I've probably been involved in the tenants movement in one capacity or other before most in this room were born. So I think I might just know a little bit
about that myself.
Well, yes, I mean, and you're in the show. But you and I, in one of the and so, yes, of course I mean, look, the Tenants Council voted for a rent increase because they thought, why would we make a bigger problem by saying no rent increase when the council is being attacked on all sides from a government that doesn't care, basically, right? Has an ideology, but it actually doesn't want municipal housing. That's not why we came here, Chair. We came here to talk about how the council consults with us, how they involve us in that consultation. I've got to say, members, and I'm probably not talking about individuals here, but collectively, you have a pretty poor track record of attending tenants council, area boards and tenants council. Now, I can remember the days, not all that distant past, when there was a dozen councils there, and certainly the director of housing would not have missed the tenants council for the exactly consultation. And Chris is right, and I said it is tenants council has been called. I cannot recall the last time she was here, right, as a tenants council. And I would confer with Chris that if she's not interested in coming, right, then she's not interested in us. Because we do have things to say. And there are lots of partnerships that go on as a result of consultation where we assist the council as well. Right? And that is the taking of a focus group years and years ago, right? I was going to a panel of the Elephant and Castle, and somebody stopped me and said they were doing a Warren Murray poll, and they asked me all these deep questions about Peter Tatchell, right? Who stood in the old days in Bermondsey. And the final question was, would you vote for Peter Tatchell? And I went, no. I said, why not? I said, because I live in this constituency. Isn't that the same thing, isn't it? Would you vote for this? Well, no, I'm not consultating, right? It's just, and that's the value of focus groups, that you can make them what you want, right? And what we're saying is that consultation, participation, how information, you've got a bad track record, folks, right, of getting information out to people out there, right? We work, we do newsletters and things like that, but you're not doing a great job, and that's one of the things you need to look at, right? You need to say, how do we consult with the people that we ask to vote for us every 4 years, right? How do we keep them informed, right? And a large part of that, right, in this borough, 40-odd thousand of us, in one capacity or another, are council tenants or leaseholders, and I think that needs to be something that you need, because it's a large group of people that are not in. I can't have an argument with what Richard says. He's caught up in the constraints, right, of the budget. We all are. But I do have an argument about the fact that we've struggled for weeks now to help old people understand why they can't go to the rent office and pay the rent. Because almost secretly, this council, without consulting, we only found out by accident, they closed the rent office.